1867 Shore Parkway.
Here's to good friends. Tonight is kind of special. A beer will pour. Must say something more somehow. So tonight, let it be low.
Some beers have been around 100 years. That's endurance. 3. Low and Brown has been around almost 600 years. That's great.
It's been so long. I'm so glad to see you. But more special beer. Since I'm glad you're here right now.
2, 3,
So tonight, let it be low and brown.
When you want the taste of a truly great beer, there's really only one. Tonight, let it be Low and Brown.
Let it be low and brown.
Available in light special and dark special, imported by the Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Critics have compared the Atlanta Rhythm section to some of the greatest rock and roll bands. From now on, compare some of the greatest rock and roll bands to the Atlanta Rhythm section.
I think we are. Welcome to Inside New York's Art World. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein, and our guests today are Nancy Graves, who in the past decade has exhibited challenging and accomplished work as a sculptor, painter, and filmmaker, and her well-known art dealer, Andre Emmerich, a past president of the Art Dealers Association, and the author of several books and many articles on pre-Columbian art and other subjects. A warm welcome to you both. Much of Nancy Graves' work conveys a lyrical, almost mystical regard for remote, unspoiled nature. For the past 8 years, natural history has provided the central theme for much of your work. How did that come about? How was that vision formed, Nancy? The nature of my question is, what has prompted you to have those intense forays into the realm of science?
It's a question that is so complicated, I don't know how to begin.
I know that it is complicated in your instance. Then why don't we begin from the beginning? For example, in terms of your own background of experience before your own art training and education, exotic places and natural history were very much a part of your life. Is that correct?
That would be correct, yes. And then I suppose to simply answer Barbara Lee's question, when I found an image that seemed comfortable and a form in which I could develop it, this affinity which I had with natural history and concern with science became a source of investigation from which various sculptural and painterly ideas could develop.
Well, after your time as a student, you went to Florence, was it?
Yes.
And there were involved in things that relate to the very first shows that you had in New York. Perhaps we should talk about the connection between your first show that was widely commented on, and that were the camels, and some of the involvement that you, and that was 1968.
Right.
And some of the involvement you had in 1965 in Europe. Let's set up what the camels were about to begin with.
Well, the camels are soft sculpture, and the inspiration for that point of view, of course, is Oldenburg. And I, as a sculptor, wanted to make something that was related to human scale, that was of soft materials, and I settled upon this form for some reasons which were unconscious and some which were known. One was the drawing that was very interesting in this in this particular animal, and the fact that it was enigmatic. And then from there, I had a notion of what further investigations I could make, which would be in paleontology, archaeology, and anthropology, which was then the development of the work.
You've said that you're primarily interested in symbols and signs. Were the camels a vehicle for that?
I think to Americans, in the point in which I was making these forms, it was a symbol for the unknown, the unfamiliar.
How did you make them? How did you perfect the armature of these forms?
Well, they're amazingly lightweight. The dimensions are 8 feet high, 12 feet long, and 48 inches wide. And yet the total weight of any one of them is under 100 pounds. And they're built of wood and steel armatures, which are in parts because of the size. And then burlap and polyurethane form the bulk of the form, the dimensions. And over that is animal skin, which is treated in various ways, which has to do with a technique that I had to devise in order to perfect this form.
Well, what in your own training and background permitted you the knowledge and the techniques to develop these forms?
Nothing. I never studied sculpture. But I did go to art school, in quotes, and I studied painting. And I think that really that's what art schools can afford you, a background. But if you're going to make art, you go against anything that you've really known someone else to master. You have to get outside of that.
Did you study anatomy and taxidermy?
No, none of those things, never.
Did you ever study taxidermy?
Well, when I became involved with some of the concerns for images, then I had to contact people who understood about taxidermy, because I was determined not to get into that area, so then I had to understand it. And when I devised pieces that were based on various prehistoric fossils, I had to speak with some of the authorities on fossils so that I knew what they were about, in order that I could make abstractions from a scientific point of view without erring.
When you talk about signs and symbols, what do you mean? How do you define that?
Well, I think what I may have meant, it depends on which work we would be speaking, but I'm interested in getting the essence of something, or the quintessence of something, rather than the realistic aspect of it. And it would depend upon the particular image in question, how I would be able to arrive at that.
Perhaps we should talk for a moment about the evolution of your work during the almost decade that has elapsed since the introduction of the camels. Can you describe that?
I mean, how the work evolved? Well, from the outside, I went inside. And that is to say, I first made the camels, which some of you may be familiar with, and then I dealt with the bone structure, which was first articulated, and then I became concerned with various sculpture viabilities in the period of 68 to 70. And so I made a large floor piece, and I made hanging pieces. I made pieces which dealt with the wall and the floor, pieces which hung from the wall, and some of which were attached to the ceiling and dealt with the floor as a space for sculpture, none of which had bases. I mean, various things like that. The development of the content was by going inside, I was essentially dealing with the problem of armature. And so having made bone pieces, then I got to the essence of what armature was. I made a piece about calipers, which is a traditional device of measuring. And then I moved from paleontology further into archaeology, and I became involved with some of those concerns, both as a system of recording information and also in terms of its visual import to my own point of view. And anthropology then figured in as well, and one of the pieces in particular that I might mention would be Shaman, which was shown in the Whitney Museum in 1970. And in that piece, I did research on the American Indian in the Northwest, which now seems very, very topical, but at that time no artist had really concerned oneself with that. And so I, again, tried to take the iconography of these forms and to develop a piece which dealt with some of the images there and some of the concerns that I had about hanging and about structuring space. And from this point, I made a number of drawings which were about camouflage and about measuring time and about measuring information, which allowed me to move from sculpture into painting. And the first series of paintings I made were called camouflage series, and they again went back into nature and they dealt with organic forms. Then from there I became concerned with mapping, because I consider mapping, whatever it means to any of us, an abstraction which is not only abstract visually but conceptually, and therefore allows a wide range of possibility. And there are 5 or 6 series of paintings that I've made with various themes in mind, some of them measuring the moon, Mars.
How did you move from the world's floor to the moon series?
The world's floor? Well, in one sense the world's floor is a fossil, in another sense the moon is a fossil. I mean, the moon is supposed to have bounced off the Earth, I believe. And another reason is that all of these sources of information I considered to be highly significant at the time in which I was working on them, to all of us. I mean, they were very, very meaningful areas of information, it seemed.
So that all the while that your art is metaphorical, there are always recognizable elements in it.
Yes, I would say so, depending on how much you know.
How much time do you spend in the researching of a piece?
Well, if I'm involved with a new project, which is a new source of content, then I have to spend quite a bit of time and to absorb as much information until I can make a point, a breaking point with that information where I have it collected together in a way that I can make art out of it. So it's hard to answer, but the transition, let's say, from sculpture to painting usually takes a year, because it takes that long to absorb material in a personal way.
What are the central concerns that tie together what appears to be diverse elements in your painting and sculpture? What is the unifying concern?
I think my arm and my eye. I can't answer better than that.
Well, what is your own most recurring symbol?
I don't have a recurring symbol.
Is there a concern that you have that is more pervasive than another?
Well, I can't answer it. Perhaps a historian could. I mean, I think I'm doing something that is new to me every time I do it, and yet if I look back through the line of my work, I find various points of view and various images, although they come from a different source or a different period or a different subject matter, they seem quite similar. And this, I think, any artist, in looking back through his or her work, finds a kind of key to what perhaps the essence of the art is about. So I'm concerned with that as a source of information to myself.
Can you give us some example of that, Nancy? You've said that you've, in the past, that what concerns you the most is the way your hand moves and the way your eye sees.
Well, I find that there's a relationship between a piece called Shaman, or the piece that I made after that, that's in the National Gallery in Ottawa, called Variability. What is it? Well, it's a variability piece, and some of the paintings I have made, even though they're in very disparate materials in there, one is three-dimensional and the other is two-dimensional, I tend to attempt to see space frontally and also perspectively. I move back and forth. I deal with small integers in space, and yet a very complex composition, regardless of what the subject matter, the ostensible subject matter is. That's one way to answer.
The two of you get together?
I think through respect.
Well, just on a practical basis, in addition to...
I don't know how to answer that.
How does an artist find a dealer, and how does a dealer find an artist?
Whom are you asking that?
Both of you. I assume the process was mutual.
Yes.
I think differs for different artists and for different galleries. In my case, it's really dealing with artists whose work I respond to. It's difficult enough to sell works of art. You've got to begin by liking them. You can't fake enthusiasm. One of the real functions is to convey enthusiasm, feeling, comprehension. If you don't feel it to start with, you can't possibly do it. You can't possibly do for an artist what an artist needs to have done, to be his window on the world, his setting, the setting for his work. None of us have universal tastes. Running a gallery is in many ways an expression of one's own taste, inclination, understanding of art. And certainly my gallery reflects my involvements, my interests.
Which are as diverse as some of Nancy's range, too. How does someone who is as interested in pre-Columbian art as you also represent contemporary artists in your gallery? What is the recurring theme of your work?
That's an essay-type question. Let me say this. It seems to me an a priori fact that if you live in 1976 and are involved in art, the most exciting thing you can possibly do is to try to see and know the best art of your own time, of our time, of right now. Who are the best painters? What is it they're doing? We live in a period, essentially the post-industrial revolution period, in which art has had a kind of pioneering role. The best artists of our time have usually been, and the most important ones, in some ways ahead of our taste. So it takes both an educated and a searching eye to, and an open-minded eye to understand them, to experience it, to catch up with them. This seems to me the great challenge. At the same time, I was trained as an art historian. I had a tremendous passion for archaeology already as an undergraduate. I simply like those things. There's also an enormous intellectual curiosity that archaeology satisfies. It is the same kind of fascination that a jigsaw puzzle has, in a sense. And I see no reason not to like both. It is, let's put it this way, a good meal consists of an appetizer, a main course, a dessert, and some wine with it. Now they're very different things, but together they make a whole. I like living with ancient objects. I like living with contemporary art. I like them together. There's one thing that's important, though. We see the past with our present eyes. Therefore, there are periods of the past which bore us, and there are periods of the past which we are rediscovering. Someone once said to me, "How come you were so clever, Andre, to get in on pre-Columbian art at just the right moment?" Well, it wasn't clever at all. It was like puberty. Suddenly, my God, there it is. You get all excited about it. I got excited about it, slightly ahead of most of everybody else. But that was the only, quote, clever thing about it. You can't be clever. You just be yourself.
How did you happen to become a dealer? You spent nearly 10 years as an editor and a writer, and then opened your own gallery. How did that transition take place?
Well, being an editor and a writer was a rebellion against the family tradition. I am the third generation art dealer. I had majored in art history. Worked at the museum.
Now, in what period of Matisse's work, the corpus of it?
Well, I think think perhaps the single most influential painting I can think of in America is the piano lesson in the Museum of Modern Art.
Why do you say that, Andre?
From observing its echoes in the work of so many artists. It led to so many other wonderful things. You know, I have written a number of books about archaeology because, among other things, it is so much nicer and safer. If you talk about contemporary artists, particularly in print, it is like putting your hand into a wasp's nest. I was in Minneapolis 2 weeks ago for the opening of a Morris Louis exhibition. And I was Morris Louis's dealer and represent the estate. And I was asked, and there was a trustees' dinner, to give a short speech on my relationship to Morris Louis. The exhibition was of his veils, these veil-like paintings, many of which are rather somber pictures, which it took me a number of years to understand, as well as some very bright, luminescent veils. And in my speech, I talked about my own experience with these more somber Louises, and it had taken me 10 years to really understand them. In the audience was the chairman of the board of the Des Moines Museum, which had just acquired a bright veil. And the chairman went up to me afterwards and seriously accused me of knocking their picture, which they had just bought for a great deal of money from another gallery, mind you, yet. So forth and so on. I thought, oh my God, you know, it is much more complicated. Well, if you talk about a Greek vase or pre-Columbian culture, why, that's all perfectly abstract and intellectual, and everyone is perfectly willing.
It's just that there aren't as many sensibilities that are informed about that material and would dare venture an opinion.
I was just telling Nancy before we came in, I was in Phoenix last week and gave a lecture at the museum and a long interview to the local newspaper in which I talked about Western art and said it stinks, of course, the cowboy and Indian stuff, and documented as to why, that it's essentially a fake kind of art, that it stopped with Russell and Remington because Indians and cowboys and cavalry stopped existing after them. They painted something, experienced something they could genuinely paint. Everything else is like Disneyland.